Hello, history nerds, and welcome to another episode of the History and Games podcast. Today, I wanted to give you guys an update on the podcast, plans for the future, and just letting y'all know how things are going. I like being transparent with these kind of things. It's gonna be a shorter episode because of that, but trust me when I say I don't think we'll be getting too many of these shorter episodes in the future. So, first things first. I got a job! I got a job in marketing, which is great because it means I get to stay in Los Angeles and not have to move back across the country to New Jersey. However, this also means that I don't have nearly as much time for writing shows as I did before. The podcast was planned by a Daniel that didn't have any obligations other than finding jobs and eating. So it was a lot easier to have a full 7 days in between episodes to do research, write, record, edit, and publish new episodes. So, what that means for the show is the show is no longer going to be on a weekly schedule. I think the best course of action, as far as my mental health is concerned, is to release episodes whenever they're ready. Not really adhering to any schedule. I'll try to put out an episode every month or so, but I make no promises. I'm doing this in the hope that this will lead to much more effort being put into the show, since I can't devote enough time for the weekly episodes. Also, I am cutting the dearly beloved games pitch segment, which was so dearly beloved that I didn't even think of a name for it before I canned it. And I'm canning it because, well, honestly, it mostly became a way for me to talk about the historical games I wanted to see, which conflicts with the original intent of the segment. I wanted to use it as a form of engagement and get other perspectives on settings and games people wanted to see. But I think I'll rework that segment for when I have more of an audience that can support that. Second on the docket, what does that mean as far as future episodes go? Well, first let's discuss the past episodes and my opinions on them. So far, I think the best episode is actually the introduction episode. I think it makes the clearest points as far as my love of history and video games are concerned, and I think that's because it was one of the episodes I spent more time on. I had plenty of time to iron out the rough edges and make something better. As for the other three, I think episodes 1 and 2 are okay. Episode 1 I would say is marginally better, but truthfully, I don't think either episodes are good as a podcast. I think it might have been better to make them as video essays, since the script and length of the episodes felt much more inspired and styled like a video essay as opposed to a podcast episode. However, that's not to say I don't find any value in the smaller episodes. I just don't think they work with the vision I have for the podcast. So, I've decided that I will be continuing the smaller episodes in the form of edited video essays, which would then be uploaded to the YouTube channel. I think that's a better home for them, and it creates a much more clear separation between the content and the podcast. The 6 Days in Fallujah interview with Rami Ismail I actually think is one of the worst episodes, but not because of Rami. Rami was an amazing guest, and I think he did a stellar job. The part that I think was bad was me. I was stuttering, rambling, not being coherent, and getting my points across. I had to edit my sections severely in order to make the podcast listenable. That's a word, right? However, as far as the future of the podcast is concerned, those interviews are what I latch onto when I consider the values I want the podcast to embrace. I think the show should be delving more into the hard topics regarding history, and that's going to require me to put myself in situations where I am almost never the expert, and that's okay. Those are clearly more important than the smaller episodes. So that means the future episodes of the podcast are going to be interviews and conversations. No more audio essays or fluff pieces. I'm going full bore on the long talks, and I think that's going to make for a better podcast. I'm also going to be canceling the Patreon, since, truthfully, I don't really think I'm nowhere near a stage where I should be having a Patreon. I think that's a step much further down the road that I don't even think I can see where I'd be, like where that step would be. So for now, the Patreon is going to be shuttered, which is all right, fine by me. And for the final topic I wanted to touch on, And this one's gonna be another experimental thing, but it. Stagnation ain't really my thing. This show is going to grow and expand, so there's always going to be experimentation. I'm going to be incorporating other historical media into the show. So that means talking about historical movies, TV shows, books, games, etc. I know this is kind of a big one, but I have good reasoning for it. One of the things I realized when I was talking to Rami last week was that media does not exist in a vacuum. Games influence films, which influence books, which influence each other, and a cycle over and over and over again. Historical media is no exception to that. I'm sure we can all pick out specifics of historical games that are directly influenced from the films, plays, or books that preceded them. It only feels natural to have conversations about those as well in addition to games. That's not to say my opinions of history and games have changed, far from it. I still think there's something special about video games and how they portray history, and as far as mediums for historical exploration and teaching are considered, I still think games are the best way to approach that. But it's foolish to think that games just exist on their own and are not influenced by the media that surrounds us. And I think it's important enough to include them in the conversation as well. The other reason for this change is simple. I know how to talk about movies. I bring this up a fair amount, but I have a degree in cinema and photography. I spent 4 years learning how films are made and how to discuss them. Honestly, I feel like it'd be a waste if I didn't talk about films in some way. I might change the name of the podcast to History and Media, but that doesn't really roll off the tongue as much, so I'll toss out a Twitter poll to gauge interest in that. Alright, that's a lot of info to dump on you all, but I'm doing my best to be as honest and transparent about the podcast as possible. I believe in this show. I think it has the potential to be something great, but I gotta put in the work to get there. And I hope these changes will ensure more work is put into every episode. Thank you all for sticking with me. I hope you have a great day. Please stay safe and do good things.